Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you a story that will touch your heart and mind. Let's get to know Oren Sterling, a man who had a surprising near-death experience after suffering a brain aneurysm in 2016. But what he found on the other side was not what he expected. Instead of light or angels, Oren found himself immersed in deep darkness. You won't believe what he discovered about himself and our existence. So, before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and hit the notification bell to receive all updates. Now, get ready for this intense and revealing journey that will leave you speechless. My name is Oren Sterling, and I am about to share with you a story that completely changed my life and my perception of the world. Before we dive into the extraordinary events that happened to me, let me introduce who I was before this crucial moment. I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, a charming town nestled at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. From a young age, I always felt called to serve others, a vocation that led me to pursue two seemingly distinct careers, but which, to me, were always intrinsically linked: nursing and pastoral ministry. As a nurse, I dedicated myself to caring for people's physical well-being, relieving pain, treating wounds, and offering comfort in life's most vulnerable moments. As a pastor, I sought to nurture souls, guide lost hearts, and provide hope to those facing life's storms. These two vocations intertwined perfectly, allowing me to care for the human being in its entirety, body and spirit. My Christian faith was always the foundation of my existence. Every decision I made, every step I took on my journey, was guided by an unwavering belief in a loving and merciful God. This faith wasn't just a set of abstract beliefs, but a living force that drove me to serve my community, to reach out to those in need, and to be a beacon of hope in a world that was often dark. Alongside my wife Lydia, I built a life filled with love and purpose. Together, we raised our children, teaching them the values we held dear: compassion, integrity, and service to others. Our home was a refuge of peace and love, a place where faith was lived out daily, not just preached. Looking back, I can say that I led a life many would consider full and satisfying. I had a fulfilling career, a loving family, and an unshakable faith. I firmly believed that I understood the purpose of my existence and God's plan for my life. Little did I know that all of this was about to be questioned, deconstructed, and rebuilt in a way I could never have imagined. November 15th, 2016, began like any other day, but it was destined to become the turning point in my existence, the day when my understanding of the world, of God, and of myself would be completely transformed. The story I'm about to share with you is not just a recount of a near-death experience. It is a journey of self-discovery, a spiritual odyssey that took me to the edges of existence and back. It is a testimony of how our deepest beliefs can be challenged, and through that challenge, how we can emerge with a richer, deeper understanding of what it truly means to live. Get ready for a journey that defies logic, questions faith, and ultimately reveals a surprising truth about the interconnectedness of all souls. This is my story, my death, and my rebirth. That Tuesday morning, November 15th, 2016, I woke up as usual, around 5:30 a.m. The crisp autumn air of Colorado entered through the slightly open window, and I could hear the soft singing of birds announcing the start of a new day. I got up, made a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table for my morning devotional, as I did every day. As I read the scriptures and prayed, I felt a slight twinge in my right temple. I didn't give it much importance initially. After all, occasional headaches weren't uncommon in my busy routine. I continued my reading, but the pain persisted, gradually increasing in intensity. By around 6:15 a.m., the pain had significantly intensified. I got up to get a painkiller, but as I headed to the medicine cabinet, I felt a sudden dizziness. The world around me began to spin, and I had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. That's when I realized that something was very wrong. As an experienced nurse, my mind immediately began assessing the symptoms: the intense headache, The sudden dizziness, the growing pressure in my skull, all the signs pointed to a condition I feared, a brain aneurysm. My heart began to race as the realization of what was happening hit me. I knew I had a genetic predisposition to aneurysms. My father had died from a ruptured aneurysm at 50. I had always been aware of the risk, but somehow I never thought it would actually happen to me. I tried to call out for Lydia, but my voice failed. Panic threatened to take over, but years of nursing training and the strength of my faith helped me stay calm. I took a deep breath, trying to control my heart rate and blood pressure, knowing that stress could make the situation worse. That's when I felt it, a sudden sharp snap inside my head, as if something had broken. The pain exploded, becoming almost unbearable. My vision blurred, and I tasted something metallic in my mouth. I knew the aneurysm had ruptured. At that moment, I was absolutely certain that I was dying. Time seemed to slow down, and a strange calm enveloped me. I thought of Lydia and the children, still asleep, unaware of the drama unfolding just a few meters away. My heart tightened at the thought that they might find me there, lifeless. With the strength I had left, I crawled to the phone. I managed to dial 911, but my speech was impaired. I mumbled a few words, hoping they would be enough for them to send help. After that, all I could do was sit on the floor, leaning against the wall, and wait. As darkness began to envelop me, I said one last prayer. I didn't ask God to save me, but instead to take care of my family. I prayed that He would give Lydia the strength to deal with what was coming, that He would guide my children in my absence, and above all, that He wouldn't allow them to find me in that state. The world around me began to fade away. Sounds grew distant, colors drained, and I felt my body becoming heavier. My last conscious thought was one of gratitude. Gratitude for the life I had, for the love I experienced, and for the faith that sustained me. And then, everything went dark. The transition from consciousness to what came next was abrupt, as if someone had flipped the universe's light switch. One moment I was sitting on the kitchen floor, struggling to stay conscious, and the next, I found myself immersed in absolute, impenetrable darkness. In that first moment, if I can call it a moment, since the notion of time seemed to have completely dissolved, I was disoriented. There was no light, no sound, no tactile sensation. It was as if all my senses had been switched off at once. The excruciating pain that had dominated my existence just seconds earlier was gone, leaving in its place a disconcerting emptiness. I tried to move, but I didn't feel my body respond. I tried to speak, but I couldn't hear my voice. I tried to open my eyes, but it didn't make a difference. The darkness was the same whether they were open or closed. It was as if I had become pure consciousness, devoid of any physical form. It was at that moment that the realization hit me with full force. I had died. The aneurysm had ruptured, and I had succumbed. Strangely, this thought didn't cause panic or fear. On the contrary, I felt a kind of serene acceptance, as if part of me had already known this was going to happen. As my mind adjusted to this new reality, I began to wait. Wait for what? Exactly, I didn't know. Perhaps the light at the end of the tunnel that so many near-death experience accounts mentioned. Perhaps angels coming to greet me. Perhaps Jesus himself, reaching out his hand to guide me to paradise. But none of that happened. The darkness remained unchanged, silent, vast. There was no direction, no movement, no perceptible passage of time. It was like being suspended in an infinite void. I began to reflect on my life, replaying memories as if they were scenes from a movie. I remembered my childhood in Boulder, my first steps in faith, the day I met Lydia, the birth of our children. Each memory was vivid and clear, as if it were happening at that very moment. I thought about all the times I had spoken about the afterlife in my sermons, all the times I had comforted grieving families with promises of a reunion in heaven. Where was that heaven now? Where were the streets of gold, the pearly gates, the throne of God? The absence of everything I had always believed in began to weigh on me. It wasn't fear I felt, but a deep confusion. Had I been wrong my entire life? Were my most fundamental beliefs nothing more than illusions? I tried to pray, but my prayers seemed to get lost in the vastness of the darkness. There was no response, no divine comfort. For the first time in my existence, I felt truly alone. Time, if it still existed in this state, seemed to stretch indefinitely. There was no way to measure its passage, no way to know if I had been there for minutes, hours, or an eternity. The only constant was the darkness and the silence. At some point, I began to wonder if this was all there was. If death was simply this, a solitary existence in eternal darkness. The idea was both terrifying and strangely peaceful. There was no pain, no suffering, but there was also no joy, no purpose. As my mind wandered through these reflections, I realized that even in this seemingly empty darkness, I was still me. My consciousness, my thoughts, my memories, all of it remained intact. And it was this realization that gave me a spark of hope. If I still existed as a thinking, conscious being, then perhaps there was more to this experience than I could see or understand at the moment. With that hope, I decided to remain open to whatever came next, even if it was just more darkness. After all, if death had taught me anything up to that point, it was that reality could be very different from what we imagined in life. As I remained immersed in that timeless darkness, my mind began to work feverishly, trying to make sense of the situation I was in. As a pastor, and someone who had always lived guided by faith, I eagerly awaited some divine sign, some manifestation of the presence of God or Jesus. I remembered all the stories I had read and heard about near-death experiences. People spoke of tunnels of light, encounters with deceased loved ones, visions of paradise. Maybe the darkness would suddenly dissipate, revealing the heavenly gates. Maybe I would hear a choir of angels or feel the comforting touch of a divine presence. But the silence and darkness persisted, relentless. As time, or whatever it was, passed, my expectation began to turn into anxiety. Where was God? Where was Jesus? Why was I alone in this void? These questions echoed in my consciousness, unanswered. I began to wonder if I was being judged. Had I failed in some way in my earthly life? Was I being punished for some unconfessed or unforgiven sin? The idea was terrifying. Throughout my life, I had strived to live according to Christ's teachings, to be an example of faith and love. The possibility that I had failed in some fundamental way was almost unbearable. I tried to review my life, searching for failures, unresolved sins, anything that could explain my current situation. I remembered the times when I had been impatient with my children, the moments of weakness when I judged others, the occasions when my pride spoke louder than my humility. But were these human flaws enough to condemn me to this eternal solitude? Fear began to settle in. It wasn't a physical fear, as I no longer had a body to feel the physiological reactions of fear. It was an existential fear, deep and disturbing. What if everything I believed in was wrong? What if there wasn't a loving God waiting for us after death? What if eternity was just this, darkness, silence, and loneliness? I tried to fight these thoughts. I clung to my faith like a castaway clinging to a piece of wood in the middle of a storm. I repeated Bible verses to myself, promises of salvation and eternal life. But the words felt empty in that infinite void. I don't know how long I spent in that state of anxiety and doubt. It could have been minutes or millennia. There was no way to know. The absence of any temporal or spatial reference made the experience even more disconcerting. At some point, I realized that my anguish was getting me nowhere. If this was my reality now, despairing wouldn't change anything. I began to try to accept my situation, as difficult as it was. I forced myself to think more rationally. If I still existed, if I could still think and feel, didn't that mean there was something more beyond this darkness? Perhaps this was just a stage, an intermediate phase before something else. I remembered the words of St. John of the Cross about the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual trial that precedes a deeper union with the divine. Could this be what I was experiencing? A purification of the soul before entering the presence of God? That idea brought me some comfort. I began to see my situation not as a punishment but as an opportunity to reflect deeply on my life, my beliefs, my purpose. I decided to use this time, if I could call it that, for deep introspection. If this was my dark night, I would face it with courage and honesty. I began to examine every aspect of my life, every belief I had held, every action I had taken. It was a painful and revealing process. I found myself confronted with truths about myself that I had ignored or denied in life. I saw the masks I wore, the justifications I made for my failures, the moments when my faith was more of a performance than a genuine conviction. But I also saw the love in my heart, the moments of true compassion and service, the times when I truly lived out Christ's teachings. I saw the beauty and complexity of my human journey, with all its contradictions and nuances. As I delved deeper into this self-analysis, I began to feel a subtle change. The darkness around me seemed less oppressive, less threatening. The silence, which had once terrified me, now seemed full of possibilities. I didn't know what would come next, if anything would come, but for the first time since I found myself in this state, I felt a genuine peace, an acceptance of the unknown, and an openness to whatever the universe, or God, or fate had in store for me. But it was as if the darkness itself had taken on a pulsating, almost organic quality. With this subtle change, I felt I was entering a new phase of my post-death journey. The anxiety and fear had given way to intense curiosity and a deep desire for understanding. It was as if the darkness now invited me to explore myself more deeply. I began to replay my life, no longer in fear of judgment but with a genuine desire for understanding. I saw myself as a child, full of curiosity and joy, discovering the world around me. I saw myself as a teenager, struggling with doubts and insecurities, searching for my place in the world. I saw myself as a young adult, falling in love with Lydia, discovering my calling in nursing and ministry. Each memory, each experience now seemed laden with deeper meaning. I could see how every choice I made, every relationship I nurtured, every challenge I faced contributed to shaping who I was. I saw the moments of joy, the birth of my children, the lives I helped save as a nurse, the souls I was able to comfort as a pastor. But I also saw the moments of pain and failure, the times I failed my family, the patients I couldn't save, the crises of faith I faced in silence. As I delved deeper into this journey of self-discovery, a truth began to emerge, a truth I had ignored or denied my entire life. I had never truly learned to love myself. This realization was like a lightning bolt cutting through the darkness. Throughout my life, I had dedicated myself to loving others, serving my community, and living according to the precepts of my faith. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to include myself in that love. I saw how this lack of self-love had affected every aspect of my life, how it had led me to constantly seek the approval of others, to judge myself harshly for every failure, and to tirelessly strive to be good enough in the eyes of God and man. I realized that in my pursuit of holiness and service, I had neglected a fundamental part of Jesus' teachings: love your neighbor as yourself. How could I truly love others if I didn't love myself? This revelation was painful, but also liberating. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders, or rather, from my soul. I understood that self-love wasn't selfishness, as I had feared, but an essential part of the universal love I had always preached. In that moment, I felt deep compassion for myself, for all the times I had judged myself harshly, denied myself forgiveness, and demanded impossible perfection from myself. For the first time, I could see myself as God saw me, not as an imperfect being constantly struggling to be worthy, but as a beloved creation, valuable in my very existence. This new understanding brought with it a sense of expansion, It was as if my consciousness was opening up, expanding beyond the limits I had imposed on myself in life. I felt connected not only to myself in a new and profound way, but to something greater, something that went beyond my individuality. It was in this moment of expansion and connection that I realized the darkness around me was no longer absolute. There was a faint, almost imperceptible light beginning to form. It didn't come from any specific direction but seemed to emanate from within myself. As I contemplated this nascent light, I understood that my journey was far from over. In fact, I felt it was just beginning. What would come next? I didn't know. But for the first time since I found myself in this post-death state, I felt truly ready to face whatever it might be. The darkness, which had once terrified me, now seemed like a cosmic womb, preparing me for a new birth, and I, finally loving myself, was ready to be born again. As I absorbed the profound revelations about myself and felt the faint light growing within me, something unexpected happened. I sensed a presence forming to my left. I can't say I saw it in the traditional sense, as I no longer had physical eyes to see. It was more like a perception, a sudden awareness that I was no longer alone in that vastness. The presence was distinctly masculine, though I couldn't discern a defined physical form. It was as if it was made of the same substance as the darkness around me, but somehow denser, more tangible. A wave of emotions washed over me: surprise, curiosity, a hint of apprehension, and, surprisingly, a deep sense of familiarity. Although I couldn't see a face or a defined form, there was something about that presence that felt familiar, as if I had encountered it before, perhaps in a long-forgotten dream. Before I could fully process what was happening, I heard, or rather felt, words forming in my consciousness. They weren't spoken in the traditional sense. It was more like the presence's thoughts were merging with mine, conveying ideas and emotions in a way that transcended language. "You won't stay here forever," was the first message I received. It didn't say whether it was an angel, a spiritual guide, or even God. But there was an undeniable authority in its voice, a certainty that left no room for doubt. I felt a profound calm envelop me. It was as if the presence itself radiated peace, dispelling the last remnants of fear and uncertainty that still lingered within me. For the first time since I found myself in this post-death state, I felt truly safe. The presence continued to communicate with me, not in a continuous flow of words, but in impressions and ideas that formed in my consciousness. I understood that my journey up to that point, the darkness, the solitude, the deep reflections, had been necessary. It was a kind of purification, a process of deconstruction and reconstruction of my being. I understood that the darkness wasn't a place of punishment, as I had initially feared, but a space of infinite possibilities. It was like a blank canvas, where I could rewrite my story, free from the limitations and conditioning I had carried in life. The presence made me understand that my experience was unique, just as every soul has its own unique journey after death. There was no fixed script, no predetermined path that everyone must follow. Each of us creates our own post-death reality based on our beliefs, expectations, and the level of spiritual growth we achieved in life. This revelation was both liberating and somewhat frightening. It meant that I had more control over my destiny than I had ever imagined, but it also implied greater responsibility. The presence seemed to sense my hesitation and spoke once again. "Do not fear. You are not alone on this journey." These words brought with them a deep sense of connection, not just with the presence beside me, but with something greater, something that encompassed all existence. It was as if, for a moment, I could feel the cosmic web that connects all souls, all beings, all creation. Then, as gently as it had appeared, the presence began to move, not with steps or any discernible physical movement, but as a shift in the density of the darkness around me. I understood, without words, that it was time to continue my journey. The presence was guiding me toward something, though I didn't know what. But now, with my new understanding and the certainty that I wasn't alone, I felt ready to face whatever came next. As we moved through the darkness, I noticed that the faint light I had seen earlier was growing stronger. It didn't come from any specific direction, but seemed to permeate the entire space around us, as if the darkness itself was slowly transforming into light. With a mixture of expectation and awe, I prepared for the next stage of my post-death journey, knowing that whatever it was, it would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything that exists between them. As the masculine presence guided me through the darkness, I began to notice a subtle yet undeniable shift in the environment around me. The darkness, which had once seemed absolute and impenetrable, gradually began to dissipate, giving way to a soft, diffuse luminosity. Initially, the light was so faint that it was barely noticeable. It was like the first glimmer of dawn on the horizon, just a hint that the night was coming to an end. But as we advanced, though movement and direction were fluid concepts in this state, the light grew stronger. The most fascinating thing was the color of this light. It wasn't the bright white I had always imagined when thinking of the high light at the end of the tunnel in near-death experiences. Instead, it was a deep, rich shade of purple, a violet that seemed to pulse with life of its own. As I watched in awe at this transformation, the presence beside me transmitted a thought. Observe closely. I focused on the purple light, and as I did, I began to notice something extraordinary. Within that violet luminosity, lines of energy started to form. They were like delicate threads of light, some a soft pink, others a golden yellow. These threads intertwined, forming complex and ever-changing patterns. The sight was breathtaking. If I still had breath to be taken, it was like watching a cosmic tapestry being woven before my eyes, each thread of light representing, what? Lives, souls, destinies. As if answering my unspoken question, the masculine presence spoke again. What you see is the fabric of humanity. Those words resonated through my being, bringing with them an understanding that went beyond mere intellectual comprehension. Somehow, I knew I was witnessing the fundamental interconnectedness of all souls in the universe. Each thread of light represented an individual life, past, present, and future. The pink thread seemed to pulse with emotions, love, compassion, joy. The golden threads shone with thoughts, ideas, creativity, and all of them were interwoven, forming a pattern of indescribable beauty. I realized there were no isolated threads in this cosmic web. Every life, every soul, was connected to countless others. Actions I had taken in life had affected not only those around me, but had rippled through this web, touching lives I had never known. It was an overwhelming revelation. All my life, I had preached about the importance of loving others, about how our actions affect those around us. But seeing this truth manifested so vividly and grandly was something entirely different. I understood that every act of kindness, every word of comfort, every gesture of love I had performed in life had created positive ripples in this web. But I also saw how my moments of anger, judgment, and selfishness had caused dissonances in the pattern. However, there was no condemnation in this vision, only a deep understanding of how everything is interconnected, of how each of us plays a vital role in the grand symphony of existence. As I contemplated this vision, I noticed something even more extraordinary. The threads of light were not only interconnected in space but also in time. I could see how actions taken in the past influenced the present and shaped the future. And in some inexplicable way, I could perceive how choices not yet made were already creating ripples in this cosmic web. The presence beside me remained silent, allowing me to absorb all of this on my own. I don't know how long I spent observing the fabric of humanity. It could have been seconds or eons. Time, as I knew it, no longer had meaning. Gradually, I began to notice that my own consciousness was expanding. It was as if, by observing this cosmic web, I was becoming a part of it in a deeper, more conscious way. I could feel the connections that linked me to all other souls, not just those I had known in life. but all souls that had ever existed or would exist. It was a feeling of union so profound, so overwhelming, that I felt as if my being was dissolving into that purple light. For a moment, there was no more Kiami. There was only the web, the light, the connection. Then, gently, the masculine presence brought me back to my individuality. Not with words, but with a kind of ethereal touch that reminded me of who I was. When I returned to myself, I realized that something had fundamentally changed. The understanding I had gained was not something that could be forgotten or ignored. It was as if I had awakened from a long dream to discover a reality much vaster and more wonderful than I had ever imagined. The presence then spoke again. "Now you see, but your journey is not yet over." With those words, I understood that I was about to enter a new phase of my post-death experience. What would come next, I didn't know. But I was certain that whatever it was, it would forever change my understanding of who I was and my place in the grand fabric of existence. As I was still absorbing the magnitude of what I had witnessed, the fabric of humanity, the interconnectedness of all souls, I felt a subtle shift in the energy around me. The masculine presence and which had guided me to this point seemed to be preparing for something. "Your time here is coming to an end." The presence communicated, not with words, but with a clear impression in my consciousness. A mix of emotions washed over me. On one hand, there was a sense of impending loss. I didn't want to leave this state of elevated understanding, this deep connection to the whole. On the other hand, I felt a wave of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. The presence continued. "What you have experienced and learned here is not your final destination. It is a glimpse, a reminder of what we truly are. Now, you must return." Return. The idea took me by surprise. Return where? To the darkness? To life? Before I could formulate any questions, I felt a powerful force enveloping me. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending around me. The purple light, the golden and pink threads, everything began to dissolve into a whirlwind of energy. I tried to hold on to the vision, to the insights I had gained, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. I felt myself being pulled, dragged by an invisible but irresistible current. The last thing I heard from the presence was, "Remember." And then, everything changed. The sensation was similar to diving into icy water. Suddenly, I was flooded with physical sensations: pain, cold, weight. After what felt like an eternity of purely spiritual existence, returning to materiality was a brutal shock. I opened my eyes, my physical eyes this time, and was blinded by a bright white light. I blinked several times, trying to focus. Gradually, shapes began to take form. A white ceiling, walls, beeping machines. The pain was almost unbearable. My head throbbed as if it was going to explode. Every breath was a tremendous effort. I tried to move my limbs, but they felt far too heavy. Slowly, reality began to settle in. I was in a hospital. I was alive. I heard voices around me, muffled at first, but growing clearer. "Doctor, he's waking up." "Mr. Sterling? Mr. Sterling, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry. I could only manage a hoarse grunt. A nurse appeared in my field of vision, her face a mixture of concern and relief. "Don't try to speak now, Mr. Sterling. You're in the hospital. You had a brain aneurysm, but we were able to stabilize you. It's a miracle you survived." A miracle. The word echoed in my mind, bringing flashes of what I had experienced. The darkness, the presence, the fabric of humanity. It all seemed so distant now, like a dream fading upon waking. In the days that followed, I was informed of what had happened. Lydia found me unconscious in the kitchen and called an ambulance. I was rushed into surgery and underwent an emergency procedure to treat the aneurysm. I had been in a coma for nearly a week. The doctor spoke in terms of clinical death, resuscitation, and miraculous recovery. To them, I was a fascinating medical case, an example of human resilience and luck. But I knew there was much more to it. As my physical strength returned, the memories of my experience became clearer. It wasn't a dream or a trauma-induced hallucination. It was real as the hospital around me, maybe even more so. As I struggled to recover physically, I also faced the challenge of integrating what I had experienced into my everyday life. How could I return to normalcy after glimpsing the fabric of the universe? How could I explain to others what had happened? More importantly, how could I live my life in light of this new understanding? The presence had told me to remember. But remember what, exactly? And for what purpose? As these questions swirled in my mind, I knew one thing for sure. My journey was far from over. In fact, I felt it had only just begun. Returning to my body was not an end, but a new beginning. And so, lying in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and concerned people, I prepared for the greatest challenge of all, to live an ordinary life with the knowledge of the extraordinary. The days and weeks following my awakening in the hospital were a surreal mixture of physical reality and deep spiritual reflection. While my body struggled to recover from the trauma of the aneurysm and surgery, my mind and spirit were in constant turmoil, trying to process and integrate the extraordinary experience I had lived through. Physical recovery was arduous and often frustrating. I had to relearn basic skills I once performed without thinking: walking, speaking clearly, controlling my fine motor movements. Every small progress was celebrated by my family and the medical staff, but for me, these achievements seemed trivial compared to the cosmic journey I had experienced. Lydia was by my side constantly, her presence a beacon of love and support. She noticed the change in me almost immediately. "Your eyes are different," she told me one day. "It's like you're seeing something the rest of us can't see." She wasn't wrong. Although I had returned to the physical world, part of me still inhabited that realm of purple light and cosmic connections. Sometimes, when I looked at people, doctors, nurses, visitors, I could almost see the threads of light connecting them, echoes of the web of humanity I had witnessed. As I regained my strength, I began to share fragments of my experience with Lydia and a few close friends. Their reactions ranged from fascination to polite skepticism. Some suggested that what I had experienced was simply the result of chemical reactions in a brain deprived of oxygen. Others, especially those with more traditional faith, were disturbed by aspects of my experience that didn't align with established doctrines. But for me, the reality of what I had experienced was undeniable. It wasn't just a memory or a vision. It was a deep knowledge that had become part of who I was. And this knowledge was transforming every aspect of my life and worldview. One of the biggest transformations was in my understanding of love and connection. Before, I saw love as something that flowed from one person to another, like water from one cup to another. Now, I understood it as the very fabric that binds us together, the fundamental force that holds together the cosmic web I had glimpsed. This new perspective deeply affected my relationships. With Lydia, I discovered a level of intimacy and connection I had never experienced before. It was as if, by better understanding my own essence, I could see and appreciate hers more fully. With my children, I found a patience and understanding that had previously eluded me. Every interaction, every shared moment, became precious in a way I had never fully appreciated before. My approach to my work as a nurse and pastor also underwent a radical transformation. The compassion I had always felt for patients and parishioners was now rooted in a deep understanding of our fundamental interconnectedness. Every act of care, every word of comfort, became for me an affirmation of that cosmic web that binds us all together. But perhaps the most profound change was in my relationship with myself. The revelation about my lack of self-love, which I had experienced during my journey through the darkness, became the catalyst for a deep inner transformation. I began practicing self-care and self-compassion in a way I never had before. I learned to be kind to myself, to forgive my own failures and imperfections. I discovered that by truly loving myself, I became more capable of loving others fully and unconditionally. My faith also underwent a significant evolution. While I still considered myself a Christian, my understanding of God and spirituality had expanded far beyond the limits of any specific doctrine. I had experienced something that transcended religion, something that spoke of a fundamental unity encompassing all beliefs and traditions. This created some challenges in my role as pastor. Some members of my congregation were unsettled by my new teachings, which emphasized spiritual unity and the interconnectedness of all souls. Others, however, were deeply moved by this new perspective and found in it a path to a more inclusive and expansive faith. As the months passed, I gradually resumed my normal activities. I returned to work at the hospital and the church, but with a new perspective and purpose. Every interaction, every decision was now informed by the deep understanding I had gained during my near-death experience. I began giving lectures and workshops about my experience and the lessons I had learned. Initially, it was just for small groups in my community, but soon word spread, and I was invited to speak at conferences and larger events. I wrote a book about my journey, titled Beyond the Light, A Journey Through the Fabric of Existence. To my surprise, the book became a bestseller, touching people from all walks of life and beliefs. I received countless letters and emails from readers saying that my story had transformed their lives, helping them find a deeper sense of purpose and a stronger connection to others and to the universe. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of doubt, times when everyday reality seemed so distant from that cosmic vision I had experienced. There were days when I wondered if it had all been just an elaborate dream, an illusion created by a brain deprived of oxygen. In those moments, I remembered the last words of the Presence, remember. And I tried to remember not just the details of my experience, but the essence of what I had learned, the fundamental interconnectedness of all things, the importance of self-love and love for others, and the illusory nature of the separations we create between ourselves. Today, years after my near-death experience, I am still discovering new layers of meaning and understanding in everything I went through. Each day brings new opportunities to apply the lessons I learned, to see the world through the lens of that cosmic vision. My life has changed in ways I could never have imagined. I left my position as a traditional pastor and founded an inclusive spirituality center, where people of all beliefs or none can explore questions of meaning, purpose, and connection. I continue my work as a nurse, but now with a greater focus on integrative medicine and holistic care. Lydia and I have become partners not just in life but also in work, collaborating on projects that promote understanding and compassion between different cultures and traditions. Our children, now adults, have followed their own paths, but they carry with them the lessons of love and interconnectedness they learned through my transformation. Looking back, I see that my near-death experience was, in fact, a rebirth. Not just in the physical sense of surviving a potentially fatal event, but in the spiritual and existential sense. I emerged from that experience as a fundamentally different person, with a new understanding of my place in the universe and my purpose in life. The vision of the fabric of humanity, that cosmic web of connections, continues to shape my perception of the world. I see this interconnectedness everywhere, in how an act of kindness can ripple out and affect countless lives, in how our actions impact the environment and come back to affect us, in the beauty of a shared moment between strangers. I have learned that death is not something to be feared, but a transition, a natural part of the cosmic cycle of existence. This understanding has freed me from many fears and anxieties, allowing me to live more fully in the present. At the same time, I have gained a deeper appreciation for life and all its experiences. Each moment, each interaction, each challenge is an opportunity to grow, to love, to contribute to the great fabric of existence. I do not claim to have all the answers. In fact, one of the most important lessons I've learned is to embrace the mystery, to be comfortable with not knowing. There is so much more to the universe than our limited minds can comprehend, and there is a profound beauty in remaining open to the unknown. If there is one message I would like to share with the world based on my experience, it is this: we are all part of something much greater than ourselves. Each of us is a unique and precious thread in the great fabric of existence. Our actions, our thoughts, our love, all of this reverberates through that fabric, affecting the whole in ways we can barely imagine. So, live with awareness, love deeply, yourself and others. Be kind, for every person you meet is fighting their own invisible battle. Forgive, for forgiveness frees not only the other but yourself as well. And above all, remember that you are loved, you are valuable, you are an essential part of the great mystery of existence. My journey continues, and I know there is much more to learn and experience. But now I face each day not with fear or anxiety, but with a sense of wonder and gratitude. For every moment is an opportunity to weave my own thread into the great tapestry of the universe, to add my own note to the cosmic symphony of existence. And so, I conclude my story not with an end, but with a new beginning. For life, as I've learned, is an eternal cycle of rebirth and discovery. And each of us has the power to shape our reality, to expand our consciousness, and to contribute to the ongoing evolution of this wonderful fabric of humanity, of which we are all a part. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. See you next time.